All right, welcome everybody, and we are live. Today we are here with a very special episode, as always, of Marshall Way Network. This is our 9th episode, and I wanted to share with you today we have a special guest, and I'll be introducing him here in just a moment, but I want to share the topic of the day. The topic is a look at capoeira, life lessons learned from this Brazilian martial art. And what I want to do right now is introduce our special guest that we have on the show, and his name, and you can see him over there waving. He'll be waving here. This is Mr. Alan One, known as Busca-Pé in Capoeira, and he is from Waterloo, Iowa. He's a very accomplished capoeirista, and I hope I'm saying all this right. He'll correct me later. And he teaches in the style of Cordão de Orle. And I'm hoping I said that right this time. But I love all of the Brazilian words and things that are used in this, and I thought this would be a unique interview style episode to have on the field of capoeira. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and bring out Mr. One. Say hello there.
Hi, hello. My name is Alan One. In Capoeira, I'm known as Busca-Pé. I'm a capoeira instructor here. Sam is one of my newest students, and he's the one that brought me into this nice little circle you guys have. Hi, I hope everybody's doing good today.
Great, thanks for the introduction there. Before we get going with some questions here for Mr. One, what I'd like to do is just remind you that below this video you'll see on the page is a chat box. And you are encouraged to log in there. It's free to log in and post any questions or just say hello. Or, if you also practice the style of capoeira and the art of capoeira, let us know. Shout out and tell us where you're from and things like that. And we will get to you. We'll try to go through those questions throughout today's episode. So let's go ahead and get started. So, first of all, I'd like to know something just to break the ice. Something interesting about you that most people don't know.
That's a hard one. I think of myself as a pretty boring person. I have 12 brothers and sisters, which actually makes us a total of 13. Some people find interesting my race or my actual heritage. I get questioned a lot on whether I'm Asian or whether I'm Latin. My father is Chinese, whose family moved to Vietnam during the Cultural Revolution in China. Then during the Vietnam War, became a Vietnamese citizen and was a refugee to America. Then my mom is German and Swedish. Then my stepfather is from Mexico, and I have a lot of ties with Mexico. And then now I lived in Brazil for a while, and I speak Portuguese. So that's some interesting things about me, maybe, that might be different.
Oh, absolutely. What a melting pot of a background. I love it. So thanks for sharing that about you. So I'm curious, how long have you been practicing capoeira?
I started doing capoeira in 2007, which would be 8 years ago now. I started right after I got out of the military. I had been doing martial arts since I was 5. I started with karate, taekwondo, American wrestling, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, a lot of the more mainstream martial arts. Capoeira itself since 2007. Since then, though, I also do boxing and Wing Chun Kung Fu, but that's more of a personal thing that I don't really instruct others on. That's something I do for myself.
Great. Interesting. So just curious, for those people who are out there and watching our show today and aren't familiar with capoeira, Mr. One, could you give us a little background, a little history on, what is the art, where did it come from, etc.?
All right, yeah, of course. And it's going to be a pretty lengthy one. So capoeira, as it's pronounced now, is a Portuguese word that has very shady origins. Everything in capoeira that we know of today that's modern, the way it's a martial art and it's taught, started in around 1930s, plus or minus 6 to 8 years. I'll get into that exactly more in a second. Capoeira before that came from the African slaves from a very specific region of Africa during the slave trade into early Brazil by the Portuguese. The Portuguese had a large slave trade, and they brought in Africans from Angola and Mozambique, mostly the central western part of Africa. A lot of the Africans that they brought over were very warlike. Their tribals, they were very dance. They had a lot of rituals in dance, and they all spoke different languages. Now, when they came over, none of them were taught how to speak Portuguese, and none of them were ever taught how to read and write. But the one thing they all had in common was their cultural connection to dance. And as the African slaves started to want to rebel, there were certain of them, there were a couple of them that were actually warriors from their tribes in Africa, and they brought a lot of that with them. And ironically enough, the Portuguese slave owners let the slaves continue practicing their dances, their cultural dances. They found that the slaves that were allowed to practice their dances were usually more happy and were better workers. The African slaves took advantage of that, and they started to hide some of their warrior dances, the dances they used traditionally back in Africa to practice getting ready for combat, and they hid that inside of their dancing nights, nights that they would get together and play music and do some of their religious rituals. That's kind of where the main part of capoeira came from now. So eventually, obviously, the Portuguese slave owners realized that the slaves were practicing to fight because a lot of the slaves started rebelling physically. There started to be uprisings. They had things called Columbos, where the Africans actually ran away and formed communities in the Amazon. And a lot of them came to be known as capoeiristas later on. They were the warriors. They all got the Portuguese army pretty much annihilated them, unfortunately. And all their history is all oral. There's no written history from any of this except on the Portuguese side. That's why there's a lot of contention in the capoeira community on exactly how it went. But as time went on, the Portuguese eventually outlawed the practice of martial arts and capoeira and any fights that the African slaves would do. And Brazil was one of the last countries to abolish slavery, and it was pretty rampant into the early 1900s. And even after they abolished slavery, they didn't do anything to really help the Africans. There was still the jobs that they had were still pretty much slave-like jobs. And what a lot of the slaves ended up doing were becoming gangs or started becoming cartels, a lot of underground black market stuff. And those gangs would hire the martial artists, the capoeiristas of the time, to be their muscle. And so that gave capoeira a huge stigma of a very violent, aggressive, street-like activity that really wasn't very good for capoeira. What ended up happening is in the early 1930s, a gentleman by the name of, we call him Master Bimba is his name. He was a practitioner and a teacher of capoeira, and he saw a lot of the Eastern martial arts, like karate, for example, that came to Brazil, and he saw the structure, and he saw the uniform, and he saw how it really helped people grow. And he had been teaching capoeira in the poor African communities, and he had a lot of kids, and he wanted to keep people off the streets. He wanted to get rid of the alcohol and really get rid of the stigma. So what he ended up doing is he took his academy and he made everybody give them their real names, which I can get into here in a second. Why my Buscape, we have fake names. Is he made everybody register their real names. He made everybody wear a uniform, which is traditionally a white uniform. He brought structure. He created a set of rules, like no drinking, no smoking, go to school, get good grades, be respectful to your elders, a long list of things. And then what he did is he took his group to the governor and the mayor of his state and put on a large presentation. And they did capoeira, they had a circle, they performed various African cultural dances with machetes and shields, and played music for them. And they got invited to perform for the president of Brazil at the time. And the president, after he saw their presentation, said what we quoted as, Capoeira is the only sport that is truly Brazilian because it takes all the elements that have really created Brazil, and you can see it in the art form. And that president got rid of the law against practicing capoeira. That opened the doors for a lot of other instructors to then open their own academies following in the footsteps of Master Bimba. And then that is what is now the modern day capoeira that we practice today.
That's excellent. That's really neat to hear the history and to understand the roots as to where the system came from. And for those of you that are listening, one of the things that I'd like to discuss on our next episode has to do with lineage and the importance of that. So let's get a little deeper into this. You alluded to the musical aspect of it because of dance. I'd like to know a little bit more about the music that you use in your practice and why, and what are some of the instruments that are vital to capoeira?
Yeah, of course. Music is a huge part of capoeira, obviously because it was there during the creation of capoeira when it was being hidden as a dance. Additionally, like I said before, there are a lot of oral stories. Nothing is written down by the slaves and the Africans at the time, so it's hard to really know how much of it is true. But what is one of the things we talk about, the Africans were pagans. They had their own religion, and one of those main religions is called Candomblé. They believe in various gods of nature. What ended up happening is, the Africans, they had the warriors, they had religious people, a lot of different professions that the Africans were in their tribes when they came over. Well, their versions of priests and religious practitioners wanted to continue practicing their religious rituals. However, the Portuguese had outlawed that. They had wanted to convert everyone to Catholicism. So what happened is, deep in the forests, the religious practitioners would ask the warriors to come and provide protection and a distraction in case the Portuguese slave owners happened to show up. So they would be in the Amazon or in the forest nearby. They would be playing music, singing their songs, doing their little rituals, and the warriors would just kind of hang out. And if slave owners came by, they would warn them, fight them off, give the priests time to run away, and then they would run away into the forest themselves. What ended up happening is the warriors started practicing and warming up while the religious practitioners were performing music. And then they started joining together, and they kind of married the two. So nowadays, you do not have capoeira without a bateria, which is what we call a battery, a line of musicians. One of the main instruments is a berimbau. It's it's where the harp came from. It comes from Africa, and there's a lot of variations on the harp where they would take a tree stump and dig a hole in the ground, and then take some fiber from like grass trees to create the string, and they would beat that almost like a drum. It's technically a percussion instrument. So modern day berimbau is this guy right here. It looks kind of like a bow and arrow. All right. So we have a long shaft of wood that's about 1.5 meters long, And it can be made out of just about any wood. It has to be tempered. Then down here at the bottom, we have what's called a cabeza. It's just a gourd that's been cut open and dried, which acts as an amplifier. And then traditionally there was grass reeds that they would use, but today we use metal wire. I don't think you can barely just see it. What we do is we actually take the metal wires out of used car tires. Yeah, and we recycle them, and we take the wires out, we clean them off, and we bake them a little bit, and then we attach it to the top and the bottom. Then we take a rock. You have the rock. Oh, it's fine. A little rock. We put that in our fingers, and we use that to change the tones and by pressing it on the wire. And then we have this little stick called a baqueta and a kashishi, which is dried grass fiber filled with the seeds of the gourd. And then we take all these little things together and we play the instrument. Thanks, bud. That's, like I said, the most important instrument. There are variations on it by changing the size of the gourd, which changes the sound to a deeper or a higher pitch. Additionally, we also use an atabaki, which is a drum. It's a Congo drum. And we also use what we call a pandeiro, which is very similar to a tambourine. This is actually a tambourine right here. We just play, there's all kinds of variations on beats that we play. And then there's other littler instruments called agogos, which are cowbells, or pieces of the gourd that they cut and dry to make like sounds. And then additionally, in the roda, which is the formation that we make when we perform capoeira, everybody is expected to clap and sing with who's ever playing the music in the bateria. So hopefully that answers your questions.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's something that I didn't have much knowledge on at all, so it's really interesting to hear. One of the things that I was wondering, it seems to me like all of the instruments are percussion instruments. Is that the case?
Yes, percussion instruments kind of are some of the easier ones that they had the resources to make. Percussion instruments also are deeply rooted in African religious beliefs. There used to be a thing where only religious leaders were allowed to play the atabaki or the drum, and before you could even touch it, you had to perform a small cleansing ritual. It is odd that they're all percussion instruments. Yeah, I never really thought about that until now.
I was just curious. So let's. I wanted to go into another part of this, and that is, one of the things that we really focus on with Marshall Way Network is improving one's life and the life of others. And I'm curious how capoeira has improved your life and the life of others.
That is a great question. Capoeira, because I practice a lot of martial arts, and capoeira, one of the main reasons I stuck with it is the sense of community it brings to the table, to the forefront. Capoeira, one of the remember I had said Master Bimba created a list of rules? One of the etiquettes or rules he created was the more, it's hard to translate this into English, the practitioner or fighter with a higher level of ability, his responsibility is to take care and induct the fighter with weaker ability. We have a really big sense of a big brother, a big sense of taking care of all of the people that practice capoeira. We do competitions and we do events where we come together, And when you do like a karate or taekwondo event, you have that sense of competition. Perfectly acceptable. In capoeira, when we come together, it's coming back together to see your old friends. Usually in those kind of weekend events, we'll stay at each other's houses, we go out to dinner. When you get into a large group and everybody claps hands and sings, it builds a very big sense of community, of friendship. And that's one of the reasons why I think capoeira is great for grounding certain people. For me personally, I had mentioned I was in the military, and I when I came out of the military, I was a very aggressive person, and there's nothing wrong with that, in a sense, but it affected my personal life, and I found that practicing capoeira, getting involved, being forced to really open myself up in a way that I had to communicate with others on more than just a verbal basis, communicating with your body, communicating with everything, your energy, your soul, your chi for some of the more Eastern practitioners. That connection really grounded me and brought me to, I guess you could almost say an inner peace, where I find that mentoring others, taking care of others, sharing the experiences, teaching some of the language, the music, the history of capoeira is just as fun and important as the physical aspect. And it's made me a much more happier, a much more relaxed person. It's taught me patience, a lot more patience than some of the other things I've done in my life. It's taught me compassion. For example, in capoeira, we don't differentiate between age and skill level as much. So when we come together and we do our rodas or our games, at any time you could go into the circle with a 5-year-old kid or a 70-year-old retired person. There's even been times where people in wheelchairs or amputees who have had their legs cut off below their knees come inside. And like I said before, it's the responsibility of the person with more ability to play and train in a way to bring out the best of your opponent. And that, just everything, all of that just really makes me happy, and I love to share that, and I love the sense of companionship you get with everyone that becomes involved. Now, ooh, wait, I don't want to take too much. The one part I didn't quite answer with your question was some of the ways I've seen it help others. Again, everything I said that helped me, I've seen it help others in that way. To not beat a dead horse too much, capoeira is also great physical exercise because it's very similar to dancing, as you can imagine, like Zumba. You're constantly moving. You're burning a lot of energy. Um, it's great for all around health. Great for balance, agility. We do a lot of movements on our hands, a lot of different acrobatic movements, spins on the ground, and then in Brazil, a lot of the poorer people are the people that train capoeira. So it's been their only source of education. So if you take the past, 100 years, 200 years of African slaves, they had no school. They had nothing. So capoeira gave them something to learn. It gave them something to dedicate their lives to. For example, Mr. Roach here has not just been learning capoeira, he's been learning a little bit of Portuguese. All of our movements are in Portuguese. He started learning music. We've taught him some songs. We're teaching him how to play instruments. I don't know how many instruments he's ever played in his life, but once he starts capoeira, he's going to learn at least 4 or 5 different instruments. So there's a lot of things that capoeira can teach people.
Great. Hey, at this time, I'd like to open it up to our panelists that we have here. We have some of our council members, like Mr. Rose, Dr. Leach, and of course, Mr. Roach, too. If you have any questions, this is a great opportunity for you. And I will check
I'll go ahead and ask a
comments
question.
box.
Just out of curiosity, like where nationally, I mean, when you got started in capoeira, how did you get started? Where were you located when you got started? Did you get started in America, in another country, and what brought you to it? I mean, I know you talked about why you do it, but what brought you to it in the first place?
That's a good question. When I had gotten out of the military, I came back home to Iowa, where I'm from, where we are now. And one of my friends from high school, he knew, we had both been into martial arts most of our life. He's really, really big into kung fu, and he had started capoeira. And when I got out, I was hanging out with him, and he said, "Hey, Alan, you should come check out this cool martial art that I've been doing." And so I did, and I really enjoyed it. And it's as simple as that. It was just another friend I had known that had tried it and invited me. When I had started in '07 here, the instructor of capoeira had been here already for about 3 or 4 years. So it was getting semi well established at the time. And I continued to train and learn from here. Eventually, though, I kind of ran into the point where I wanted to learn more. So that's when I decided to move to Brazil for a little while. And what I did is my teacher, the one that I had learned from here before he had moved away already, and he had moved on. He's gotten married. He has kids now. He's much older. I went to the academy he trained at, our actual master in Brazil. And then what I did was I stayed in the academy. I lived in a little bungalow actually above the academy, and my day consisted of waking up, cleaning, training, eating lunch, training, cleaning the academy, training, going out that night with people from the academy, coming home or to the bungalow and sleeping and doing it all over again for several months. And then I learned a lot from that because in Brazil, obviously there's cultural differences, learning. I wanted to go to get a better grasp on the language, to get a better grasp on the day-to-day lives of Brazilians that eat, live, and breathe capoeira. And some of those guys, that's really all they have. Their inspirations. Some of them, they really can't read. They never went to school. They can't do math, but they're famous or well known in the areas they are. They're in great health. It's just all those different things. So I hope that answered your question.
Any other questions from the group before I ask a few more?
Alan, can you talk a little bit more about the formation when people get into a roda, kind of how the rhythm of the game goes, what the formation is, and how that works in terms of the community and the movement of the game itself?
Sure, that's a good question. I had thought about wanting to elaborate on that because I had mentioned roda. Roda. It's Roda. It's literally translates into circle. And then bateria, which is the battery line of musicians. So if you were to imagine just a straight circle with a line on top of it, that would be what a capoeira formation would look like from the sky. So the berimbau, that main instrument I had showed earlier, is the most important instrument and often the entrance and the exit for the roda. So everybody who's not playing an instrument forms the circle. Then the two people closest to the main berimbau are the ones that will enter the roda. They usually will come down and bow. And one thing I want to say is, even though there's a lot of religious roots in capoeira, you do not have to be religious or practice any of those religions to practice capoeira. It's no longer associated together. It's just the history. But a lot of people will still follow some of those traditions, and some of them will even do the Catholic cross before they enter, just as a asking. Saint Michael is the traditional saint for capoeiristas for protection. And then the capoeiristas will normally shake hands, signifying brotherhood, signifying that they're not coming into the harder with bad energy. They're coming in as friends, as brothers, as teammates. And then after that, we do what's called an au, which is basically a cartwheel. And both participants will cartwheel together into the center of the roda. From there, that's what starts the fight or the game. And in Portuguese, the word for game and the word for like warlike fight has a blurred line right there. So it's hard. Sometimes we call it a fight, sometimes we call it a game, but it's really both to us. And then you go through all the different movements. When those two participants have finished, they will shake hands again and then return back to the entrance or walk backwards out of the roda to rejoin the circle of people, and then two more that are closest to the berimbau follow suit, shake hands, and enter the roda.
Okay. Sounds pretty interesting. I'm excited to see that.
Yeah. We haven't quite done that with you just yet.
Yeah. We've done a little bit with our group here, but I haven't been to a full circle yet.
Yeah, you'll go through in July probably.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you for that description. Great question too, because I was curious myself as to how it worked. I did want to ask as well. You had mentioned in the history that there are different styles or lineages. Can you talk a little bit more about the different styles and lineages of the world of capoeira?
Yeah. So my lineage is what we call lineages are usually in groups, and you can tell a lineage by the group. My group is Cordão de Ouro. It's one of the bigger ones. We're also one of the more unique ones because the way are we good?
Yeah.
Okay. The way our lineages work is when you go back to Master Bimba, the guy I had talked about, he was what we call regional, which translates into regional, which doesn't make a lot of sense. But regional is a much more stand-up, much more fight-like game. Even though he had, explained or expressed all those things about brotherhood and stuff, he still said that on the street, if somebody walks up to you and threatens your life, you should be able to use capoeira to defend yourself. So he did push a lot more of the stand-up fight game. Shortly after he managed to get capoeira legalized, another Master Pastinha, created a style known as Angola, which is the same name as the country in Africa, Angola. And his whole premise was he wanted to bring capoeira back to the traditional African religious warlike dance practice that it was before. So Master Bimba wanted to take capoeira and turn it into something similar to what he had saw Eastern martial arts doing. Master Pastinha wanted to take it back to an African religious root structure. So that created two completely different extremes. The Angola style of capoeira is a little bit slower with sneak attacks. It's much more dance-like. It's much more lower to the ground. You've almost always got a hand on the ground, a head on the ground. A lot of the movements, even the names of the movements, like Shaolin Kung Fu, have a lot of animal attacks or animal names, like Haba Jihaya. which means the tail of the stingray, or scorpion, which is scorpion because you mimic an attack of a scorpion tail. So it's got a much more earth-like, much more, what's the word I'm looking for? Tribal-like sense to it. It's got a lot more ritual. Now, as time has gone on, you have those two styles and everything in between. So Koranjioru, my group, practices contemporando, or contemporary capoeira, where our goal is to find a middle ground, and at any time we could perform capoeira, practice capoeira with any other group or style that we happen to encounter. So if we encounter somebody completely Angola or an Angolino, we are able to perform certain movements that we practice that combine with them but still don't step on their feet. If we encounter someone who's Haitianal, who's very stand-up, we practice movements to counter a lot of their attacks. Because what we find in my lineage is that when you focus too much on one side, you have a lot of openings, you have a lot of weaknesses in your style, in your game. So we try to form a much more open style. What ended up happening is my group is now known for adding a lot of flair. We have a lot more acrobatic movements to where we'll be doing capoeira and it'll look like we're performing some kind of almost break dancing like move, and when somebody steps in to attack us or to take advantage of us, we have a sneak attack, like that scorpion kick I was telling you about from the Angola side, comes out of nowhere and hits him in the head. So that's kind of what we focus on. And then also my group focuses on heavily on music, much more heavily than a lot of other groups do. Mainly because the master that broke off, that created Coranjioru, is a very famous Brazilian musician, Mestre Suassuna. He has several, like probably hundreds of albums and musics that you can get. And because he's so accomplished in music, most of his students have followed suit. So if you meet another capoeirista and you're like, hey, what group are you from? And you say Coranjioru, most people will immediately associate that and know, like, oh, I love you guys' music, or you guys play beautiful music. A lot of our music explores new things. We go past traditional. And then my style, usually people like to play against us because our style is much more showy. We do a lot more, we focus really heavily on entertaining people watching us, and I like that because, you know, the whole point of presenting, and there's a hard that anyway people are watching you, you know, it's fun to entertain others. So that's some of the different lineages we have.
I had a question, and that was, you know, if somebody is interested in getting into capoeira, what types of things should they look for in in an academy?
So capoeira, like I had mentioned, since there's a few different lineages, and because it's still a relatively new and young martial art, especially compared to Eastern martial arts, you know, it didn't really get formalized until 1930s. It's still trying to find its foot, its place in the world, you know. There's some people that are trying to make competitions. There are people that try to go back to religion. So my first suggestion would be to just go to like Wikipedia and do a little groundwork research on capoeira. Once you have an understanding of what type you'd like to do, if you happen to find an instructor or, you know, multiple instructors in your area, visit with them. Usually it's really easy in capoeira to just go into an academy and say, I'm interested, and just watch them. You know, we're very, like I said, we like perform. So if somebody comes in and they're interested and they're not quite sure if they want to get into it, most times they'll say, okay, well, if grab a chair, sit down, go ahead and just watch how we are, and if you like, you can jump in at any time. If they do find an academy and they do happen to go and do that, I really suggest just trying to get a feel for the instructor and maybe ask them questions at the end of class and try to get where that instructor's personal beliefs are in capoeira and just see if that fits with you. And the reason I say that is because some instructors are much more focused on the combat. Some are much more focused on the dance, the music, and anywhere in between. And if you can find a good connection with an instructor, you'll really enjoy learning from that instructor. And I think that goes beyond just capoeira. That goes into anything. If you can make connection, then learning will be easier. And that's also the job of the instructor, to be able to make those connections.
We had spoken earlier before this episode about the Shay. Can you talk a little bit about that and what that means?
Yeah, axé is actually a really funny word in Portuguese. It's spelled just like axe, but it has a little accent on the E. Axé means good vibes, like good energy. If you've ever been at a dance party and the music's going and everybody's jumping and just having a good time and you feel that sense of positive flow inside you and you can feel it from others, that's axé. Sometimes, if anybody's familiar with samba, it's a very famous Portuguese or Brazilian like dance where women, can kind of get all crazy. But they use axé a lot in that. In capoeira, we try to build axé, and we do see it a little bit more as like a chi type energy more than just the modern Brazilian culture. Because what we try to do in the Honda is the circle. And we do that in a way, and this is taught, that the two practitioners are releasing a shay. And then the Honda itself, everybody is singing and releasing a shay back into the Honda, bouncing it off the practitioners, which then bounces back off the people who create the Honda. And we try to keep that ashay inside to just build and build. And for example, we don't like to break the circle of the Honda or break the bataria because that releases the ashay we've built out of the environment. So it's almost as if the ashay has a substance, you know. I've always related it to chi, really, but it's not quite like chi because I do think chi's got a little bit more of a not religious, not magical, but it's chi I think is a teeny bit different, but it's the closest thing I can find to really give someone a relevance to understand it.
That's great. Well, are there any other questions for the group? From the group? I haven't seen any come through yet from the chat room. No. Okay, I did have one more I just thought of, and that is, as far as the self-defense aspect of capoeira.
Ron Leach.
Go ahead. Dr. Leach, are you still there? Go ahead. I think we may have lost him. I'm not hearing him.
To Capoeira with who took lessons and brought me to a class.
We're having some trouble hearing you, Dr. Leach. So what we'll do is if there's other questions that come through, we will email you or message you, Mr. One, and then from there maybe you can answer them and I can post them into our group. But I did have a question in relation to the self-defense aspect of capoeira. I wanted to know, do you have actual self-defense training that you do alongside of the Hada?
Yeah, that's actually a huge misconception that we like people to have. One of Master Bimba's things in his list that he created was don't show people outside of capoeira what you can do, because you don't want them to be able to expect the attack or defend the attack when you attack them. If you come from other martial arts and you come into capoeira, you can see the attacks. So not everything we do is obviously an attack, but you can ask Sam. Most of the main type of kicks that you have in other martial arts, we have in capoeira. We have back heel spin kicks, we have front heel kicks, roundhouses. We have a lot of. Oops, push the buttons. Sorry, our lights are on a motion sensor. We have a lot of sweeps, takedowns, leg traps. We have a few attacks. We do mostly with our legs, but we have a few attacks where we do attack with our hands, with the palm coming up into the nose, hitting the ears to take out the eardrums, knee attacks, everything you'd find in any other martial art. What we try to do, though, is hide them within movements or to attach them at the end of something that doesn't look like you're going to attack someone. And that is what we try to aim for, is we don't want people to know. We want people to think we're a very ineffective martial art. On the street, if someone were to approach a capoeirista, just like karate, for example, you have your training stance, but then you have your sparring stance, right? You change your hands a little bit. We do a very similar thing in capoeira. In class, in the roda, we do what's called the jinga, which is like a basic step sway where you can relate it to salsa or anything like that. But if we were to encounter somebody on the street, we don't do that. we stand like a normal person and we attack, or if someone comes at us, we will jump back and then to goad them into coming at us and just do, kick them right in the gut, break their knee, slap them in the face. It doesn't matter. The thing about capoeira is most of our attacks, and a lot of the attacks that we can do that I haven't shown Mr. Roach here, are very debilitating attacks, like gouging out an eye, breaking your eardrum, trying to shove the nose into the skull, a lot of things like that. Some of them when we would take someone down to the ground, after we would take them to the ground, we would attempt to smash their face into the ground afterwards. And a lot of those things are not taught initially for several reasons. We don't want people to just go around doing that, and we also don't want people to see us doing that. So there are a lot of self-defense techniques, and myself personally, for boxing and Wing Chun, I like to, when I practice with myself and almost my own personal MMA style, I combine all of those. So there's a lot of attacks in capoeira that can really benefit somebody from other styles for our balance and our tricks and sneaking in attacks from unknown angles is what we do. Because a lot of times if you're walking down the street, you're walking, you're not in a fighting stance. So if you practice the ability to throw a kick or defend an attack from a walking like movement, it's much more practical. And And that's kind of where we come from Capoeira in an actual self-defense philosophy.
That's interesting. I did want to ask another question too, and that is, you know, as a martial arts, in karate, Shorin-ryu karate, it's vastly different as far as, you know, the way that we do our styles. But one of the things I noticed is a lot of capoeirists or capoeistas, as you shared with me, they have these chords that seem to represent something similar as we do with our martial arts belts. Could you explain a little bit more about your chord system?
Yeah, I can. This is a really interesting one. Master Bimba wanted to. That was one of the things he saw other martial arts doing, and he wanted to have something very similar. Now we don't call them belts; we call them chords. Not every group uses chords or uses them the same way. The most common method, and the method my group uses, is a 9-chord system that is color coded and uses the colors of the Brazilian flag: green, yellow, blue, and white. Different combinations of the chords signify a different level. Uh, we make our own chords. They're braided. The very first chord you receive is a green chord. Now, traditionally, you do not receive that green chord, just like other martial arts, until you pass your first examination. So you essentially have no chord for the first year or so. After green, you have green yellow. After green yellow, you have yellow. Then after that, you have green yellow. You're still on. After that, you have blue yellow, and then you have blue. Those first 5 chords are pretty much the chords that everybody can achieve. You easily find people that never go above blue. Blue is what's called official instructor. All the other chords below that are just their colors are their names. By the time you reach blue chord, it's instructor, and you can have instructors all the way until you're no longer able to teach. The only reason you go above instructor is when you get to the point where you're not teaching as much physically, but you have other people under you who teach, who have their own schools, their own academies, that you are now somebody above others that teach. And then you kind of reach different levels like that. So after that, you have what we call professor, contramaster, mastering, and finally you get to grandmaster, which is just solid white. And all those chords are just varying combinations of all the chords below them. Let's see. Did I answer everything in your question? I think so. I think I got everything. If not, remind me.
No, that was great. Well, we're actually right at almost at the top of the hour here, and so I just wanted to open it up one last time if there's any last questions from our panelists that are there. Okay, Mr. Rose is shaking his head. Okay, all right. Well, once again, Mr. One, I want to thank you so much for coming out today and being our guest on the show. I've learned a great deal of information that I had no idea about on capoeira, and it seems like it really fits into the vision that we have here in the martial arts and the Martial Way Network, with becoming a better person and helping others to do the same. So I appreciate you carrying on the torch and the journey in your practice there, and continue what you're doing. And it's an honor to meet you and have you here. Thank you, everyone. See you next week, and we'll be sending out some emails on what's coming next for our episodes. Take care.